Welcome to today's session, Privacy Compliance and Technology in Healthcare, brought to you by Rafiki Technologies and Information Managers. And we're going to be talking about privacy compliance, privacy impact assessments, as well as the cybersecurity measures to have in place to keep your practice safe and your patient data safe. And just to let you guys know that this session is being recorded, so you guys will have access to the full recording when it's over. And this is also a very casual environment. So if at any point you have any questions about the content that we're talking about today, just feel free to send a message in the Zoom chat and we'll do our best to address your questions. And then at the end of the presentation, there is a Q&A portion too. So if you want to just wait till the end, we can kind of open it up for a Q&A there as well. And then feel free to email us with Rafiki Technologies or Information Managers with any other questions. We're always here to help. And so I will start by introducing our speakers today. So we have Jean Eaton, and she is your practice management mentor and your practical privacy coach with Information Managers. Thanks for joining us today, Jean.
Good evening. I'm happy to be here.
Great. We also have Naheed Shivji, and he is the founder and president of Rafiki Technologies. And so we're going to start with Jean. I will let you take it from here.
Okay. Thank you, Alyssa. And thank Naheed for inviting me to join this group tonight to talk about privacy, compliance, and technology in healthcare. So we're going to talk about some legislative overview. We're going to talk about privacy impact assessments, and we're going to talk about technology and cybersecurity and all things exciting like that. So one of the things I want to do to get started is to get an understanding about where the people in our audience are as far as doing a privacy impact assessment, a PIA. So we're going to talk starting with privacy compliance and the importance of privacy compliance. So a privacy compliance program is a systemic approach to governance designed to ensure that the organization meets its obligations under laws, regulations, best practices, standards, contractual obligations, and institutional policies. So in other words, we want to be accountable and we want to be transparent. And perhaps even more, we want to make sure that you've got an efficient practice in your healthcare practice that is meeting your privacy compliance requirements. So when you've got good policies and procedures in place, when you've selected good vendors, when you've got technology that has the appropriate safeguards in place, you're going to have a good business. And that's what we all want to be able to do. So we're going to talk a little bit about legislation, and we're going to talk about the Canada Spam Act as well. So Canada's anti-spam regulation came into effect a number of years ago. And you might remember specifically that people were asking you to opt in or re-opt in to an email account or a program that you had online. And one of the reasons was because we had to update our business profiles and how we managed to collect information on websites and be more transparent to our clients, our customers, and our businesses and the world in general about how we were collecting and using cookies, how we were tracking people's activities on our websites. Now, in particular, in healthcare, we have to be even more transparent. So we need to let people know about what we are or what we are not doing when they visit our clinic website. So if you have a website and you've got people coming to visit it, even if they don't enter their name and healthcare number on your website, you're still tracking their electronic footprint. And you need to be clear about what you're doing with that and what you're not doing with that. So you might retarget them for marketing or not. You might ask them to opt into a lead magnet or some additional information from you. You might be asking them to click on an article in Google My Business. But you need to make sure that you've got a privacy compliance policy that you have inside your organization so that you know what questions you're going to ask and what you're expected to do with that information. And you need a privacy policy on your website. So if you are a healthcare practice and you don't have a privacy policy yet, I've got an easy solution for you. So you can go to the Canadian Medical Protective Association, CMPA, and they have a template that you can download to customize for your practice and then upload it to your website. That's not a big amount of technology that you have to do. If you get the words in place, then you can get your web host to help you with uploading that privacy policy if that's not something that you're comfortable with doing yourself. So that one out of the way. We've got the Canada Spam Act. People are always asking me in healthcare practice, well, I don't ask my patients any questions on the website, so why do I need a privacy policy? It's because we've got lots of different types of legislation that we need to comply with, and that is one of them. Now, we're also going to talk about the requirements for health information and personal information. Now, in Canada, we have privacy compliance requirements across Canada for our business, but the delivery of healthcare and the funding for healthcare is largely on a provincial basis. So we have provincial health legislation. So we have privacy legislation that's specific to our provinces. And the big piece that I want to make sure that you understand is that we do not follow the HIPAA legislation. That's the US legislation. And there's a lot of similarities between the US legislation and our provincial legislation, but you need to follow your provincial legislation. So if you select a vendor who says that they're HIPAA compliant, that's great, but it doesn't meet your provincial legislation. And that's a standard that you need to meet. Now, other privacy legislation that we need to follow is our Personal Information Protection Act, the PIPA legislation in Alberta, or PIPEDA or PIPAPA across most of the rest of Canada. So that's the business information that the business collects, your employee information, your customer information, your retail information, the credit card information from your clients. So we're going to talk mostly about the requirements for the privacy legislation in healthcare, but remember that you have other obligations as well. So personal information is any information that uniquely identifies an individual. So you could be talking about a car, and that's not personally identifying. But if you talk about Mary's car, then that does become personally identifying. So if personal identifying information in your practice would include your employees' information, your healthcare providers' information, some business information. When we talk about personal health information, then we're talking about information that we've specifically collected to manage the health of those individuals. So the health information includes that identifying information, the name, address, date of birth. It specifically includes the health registration number or the health insurance information, and it might include that diagnostic treatment and care information and other types of registration information like the appointment dates and so on. Now, it's really important whether we talk about personal information or personal health information, because they overlap, that it only takes a few pieces of information to make it personally identifying. Generally speaking, if you've got 3 pieces of information, then you can uniquely identify an individual. So here's the kicker. It doesn't take much to be personally identifying. So when you take a look about what information that you have, what information that you collect, it doesn't take a lot of information to make it personally identifying. So if you've got any information that is involved in a privacy breach, for example, it is probably going to be a requirement that you report that privacy breach. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So personal health information includes all those things that you expect it would, including some technology pieces about the website ID, the IP address, an email address is personally identifying. So one of the questions I get frequently is, do I have to worry about all this privacy legislation stuff? All I'm getting is their email address. Yes, the email address is personally identifying. So don't get caught up in that. Make sure that you know what is personally identifying information. Now, privacy is actually a right. So privacy is a right in our organization or for individuals to know that we have the right to be able to decide what information about ourselves that we want to be able to share with somebody else. So even though a small business may have a small number of employees or a number of patients, each individual's information is important to them. So you might be sending out 100 referrals a day. And if you've got one referral for one patient that goes in the wrong place, we tend to think that maybe, it's only one mistake, not a big deal. But it's always important to the person that the information is about. So our right to be able to decide how we choose which people have access to our information, to know where it goes and know where it doesn't goes, is a really important right. And it's a responsibility that both you have as the healthcare provider or the clinic owner, and also a responsibility for individuals. So before we share our personal information, we should be asking people that we share it with, why do you need this information? What are you going to do about it? As the healthcare provider or the clinic owner, people that are in the front line need to be able to respond to patients when they ask those questions, because they should be asking. So you need to make sure that your healthcare providers and your staff know where that information is going. Is it kept secure in your clinic EMR? Where is your clinic EMR data stored? Just having the information in the cloud isn't good enough. You need to know exactly which company has it. Where is that company? What are the access controls? And we're going to get into more discussion about that as far as reasonable safeguards. When you have good practices in place, when you have good communication amongst your team, when you've selected good vendors to support you, you've got good privacy practices, and privacy is good for business. So when you have good systems in place, you are less likely to be affected by a technology problem, a privacy breach. You're going to be more accountable for the information that you have, and you're going to be more responsive to any incidents when and if that they happen. So these are all good things that we want to know when we talk about privacy impact assessments, and PORAs. So a privacy impact assessment is a risk assessment that all businesses should do, that assesses you to review the implementation of new administrative practices, information systems, or changes to existing practices or systems related to the collection, use, and disclosure of individually identifying health information and the impact that it might have on privacy. So that's really important to know. It's a routine business practice. It is a way to assess risk, to make sure that you've asked all the right questions, that you've got the right answers. And it is a routine practice that every business should be doing. In healthcare, we have an added responsibility to ensure that we have completed a privacy impact assessment, that we've done the documentation. Now, in Alberta, we've got an extra layer of requirements that we must submit a privacy impact assessment before you implement a healthcare practice, or a new EMR or a change in systems. And we need to submit it to the regulator, the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner in Alberta. Now, each province has its own regulator, or sometimes they're called an ombudsman. Alberta has a unique requirement that you must submit your PIA to the Commissioner's Office for review. All the other provinces require that you complete a privacy impact assessment. So if you're working in Ontario in a healthcare practice, you still need to complete a PIA, and you're going to use that as your supporting documents if and when you have an incident. So doing a PIA is an important step, and it's a good way to be able to assess your risk and to make sure that you've got the good systems in place. Now, a PORA document is unique to Alberta. This is a requirement, a prerequisite when you have request access to the Alberta Netcare portal. Alberta Netcare portal is our electronic document repository, healthcare repository from lots of different systems, including our regional health authorities, our pharmacies, our labs, our x-ray departments. And this gets sent to the Alberta Netcare portal, which is a data repository for the temporary storage of information so that healthcare providers can access that temporary registry to be able to see the most current lab test results and prescriptions and discharge summaries from hospitals. In order to have access to that, the information manager that manages Alberta Netcare portal, so that's managed by Alberta Health, has a requirement that you need to complete a PORA document, the Provincial Organization and Readiness Assessment. And the PORA document asks you questions about what policies and procedures do you have in place? How have you selected good vendors? Who's responsible for updating your technology? How do you know when somebody is accessing information inappropriately? So they're asking very similar questions as you do for your privacy impact assessment, but it's for a different purpose. So if you're in Alberta, a healthcare provider, and you want to have access to Alberta Netcare, you must complete the Alberta Netcare PORA document. So that's the difference between the PIA and a PORA document. They're both different types of risk assessment. Every healthcare business needs to do a privacy impact assessment. If you're in Alberta and you want to have access to Netcare, you also need to do a PORA document. So we're going to talk about 5 key elements for your privacy impact assessment. And Alyssa is, are we going to talk about that now, or is Naheed jumping in here? Are you passing off?
I think you can go through these points at a
Okay.
high level, and then we'll let Naheed jump in.
Okay, excellent. So there are 5 key elements for a privacy impact assessment. And the first one is to know your gold. And the second is to know your obligations. The third is to know your risks. The 4 is to plan reasonable safeguards. And number 5 is to monitor. So the first step is to know your gold. And what this means is that you need to know where all of your important information is. Where are all of your personal information systems? Where is your financial information kept? Where is your employee information kept? All of your identifying information. So you can enter in the chat some examples about where you keep those personal identifying information. Where do you keep your gold in your healthcare practice? So you're going to have perhaps an electronic medical record system. You might have a payroll system. You might have a point of sale system, or a way to collect monies from your patients and clients for uninsured services. All of those are information systems, and you not only need to know where it is. There's a difference between, academically or intuitively having a list in your head as opposed to having a list on paper. Now, I'm an Excel spreadsheet kind of gal, so I want to have my lists of all of my inventories about where personally identifying information is in an electronic Excel spreadsheet, so that I know where all of my information is. So if we've got a system problem, if there's a breach problem, if there's an access problem, I got a list of where all the information is, so I know I can go back and check it. And that's one of our obligations. So obligations are broken down into 3 categories. They're legislative obligations, your agreements, and you might have additional obligations because you have regulated health professions. And as a member of a regulated health profession, you have standards of practice and code of conduct that you also need to meet. So the foundation for any privacy program is your policies and procedures. And in your policies and procedures, you should be reflecting back about what legislation that you need to meet. So you want to get into details in your policies and procedures and cross-reference it to your provincial privacy legislation to say, I know that we have to meet reasonable safeguards requirements. And it says that in Section 62, Sub 1 of the Health Information Act. So you should be able to have those words actually in your policies and procedures. So we need to know which legislation that we follow. And then we have some agreements. So for example, if you're a clinic in Alberta and you have an agreement to use Alberta Netcare, you have to sign an information management agreement between Alberta Netcare, Alberta Health, and you as the healthcare provider. In Ontario, you have obligations if you want to be part of the community clinic system, and to share information between those between those healthcare providers. That requires an agreement as well. So there are business agreements, and there are agreements that are required directly from legislation. So those are the 3 areas about obligations that you need to complete in your policies and procedures, and that will also be reflected into your privacy impact assessment. Then you need to know your risks. So your risks can be in a variety of different ways. So practice management system that's server based, that's great to know where your information is. Now the next step is, what are the risks of all those bad things that could happen? And then how are you going to mitigate those risks? So to know your risks, there are some common breakouts that will help you to do a 360 assessment about your risks. What is your risk if you're using a server-based information system about loss or loss of control? If that vendor goes out of business, are you going to lose access to your information? If you're going to move from one vendor to another vendor, how is all of that data going to transfer to one system or another? Or is it? Most of the time, not all of the information transfers. So how are you going to address the gap, the stuff that gets left behind? Because you still need to meet the obligations for continuation of care and retention of those records. So yeah, absolutely. You could have a server failure. It could be a short-term risk. So that could be a risk of a loss. You might have a risk of unauthorized access. So somebody accessing your system who is not supposed to. So you're going to take a look at that. And these should be the leading questions to help you take a look at your risks and do the brainstorming, find out all those bad things that could happen. And then you're going to address how you're going to prevent it. It could be authorized access for unauthorized use. That's essentially snooping. So you have access to the computer systems or the patient records, but you're not supposed to use it for anything else other than providing a health service. If you're just curious, you're just looking, or you're trying to snoop on an ex or family members, then that is snooping. You could have a risk internally. Now, it used to be that our biggest risks of having a privacy incident or a security incident was internal to the organization. So it was somebody who had made a mistake, because we're all human and we will make mistakes, that they filed the information in the wrong place. They shared it to the wrong person. They left the computer and didn't log out of the system. But we also have external risks, and Naheed's going to talk about cybersecurity, and that risk is increasing exponentially. So it's the bad guys trying to get into your system because you've got some really valuable gold in your system. So when you take a look at the risk, take a look at these different vectors and ask questions about each type of personally identifying information in each of those gold sections that you've got, so that you can get a really comprehensive review about all of those risks and how are you going to prevent those risks. So this is where you're going to plan those reasonable safeguards. You're going to take a look at the 3 types or categories of reasonable safeguards for each of those risks. Administrative safeguards are generally those things that you have in writing. It's the policies and procedures, having contracts, having oaths of confidentiality, having a training program. So for each of those risks, for example, having a server failure, what is the administrative safeguards that you could have in place? Well, you could have a business continuity or disaster resumption plan. So you've got a written checklist with all the important information and the phone calls or the phone contact information to make sure that you can mobilize and mitigate the risk of business continuity as quickly as possible. Technical safeguards. So using the same example about a server failure, do you have a backup? How quickly can you restore it? Who's responsible for doing it? Are they available when you need them to be? How long do you need for recovery? Are you okay if you don't have your server for a day? Do you need it installed in a week? There are some organizations that have thought they had good systems in place and didn't test it, so that when they actually did get attacked by ransomware, there's a community center in the United States that's quite large that hit the news very recently, where they were attacked by ransomware in October, and by December they still were not up and operational. So what are you going to do when those bad things happen? And then test your plan to make sure that you can actually get up and operational again. Physical safeguards. So you've got a server failure. where is that server? Who has access to it? Can you swap it out? If it was a part that was missing, can you, now find that cooling system or that fan so that you can get your server operational? How are you protecting that server room? Do you have it in a confined space that's got appropriate air and cooling, or something else? So your privacy impact assessment is going to have all of these things. You're going to identify all of those risks and the mitigation safeguards, so you can come up with a really comprehensive plan to protect that patient's information. And then you're going to monitor it. So you might have a number of different ways to monitor. You could audit the activity. You can use some artificial intelligence to take a look at your audit logs to quickly identify if people are looking at things that they don't normally do, which might indicate an incident. You're going to test and update your system, and you're going to supervise. You're going to make sure that people are doing what they said they were going to do, that they understood your explanations, that they understood the training and they're doing what you expect. And then you document. Make sure in your privacy impact assessment, you're going to record how you are going to monitor, and then actually do it. So if you've done a previous PIA and now you're doing a PIA amendment, you want to highlight what you have done lately. So in 2013, when you first got started, you said you were going to do this. Now that it is 2021, have you actually implemented it? Having that documentation process is critically important. And that's what is going to help you if you have a security or a privacy incident, is not what you think you did or what you think you said. It's what can you prove that you did? So that documentation part is critically important. Over to you, Naheed.
Thank you, Jean. Cybersecurity is important for every organization. Why? Because we see approximately 4,000 attacks a day. Cybersecurity involves techniques in helping secure various digital components, namely networks, data, and computer from unauthorized digital access. One reason cybercrime continues to increase is because it is cheap, it is fast, and it is very profitable. Some of the online applications, cloud applications, services, such as Microsoft 365, Google Apps, which are almost daily operational tools that we use, are few of the online cloud services that store data, which we need to protect, which we need to back up for our sensitive information. There are multiple ways of implementing cybersecurity in your clinics, depending on the type of network and applications used in your organization. Let's look at some types of cyber attacks. Malware attack, which is a Trojan or adware or a spyware, which is running in the background, capturing information from your clinic servers and uploading to a remote site. The other one is most commonly used is a phishing attack. A fraudulent link is sent in an email asking to confirm details, reset passwords, accept payments, and your account is hijacked. Your credentials are hijacked. The other one, of course, is man-in-the-middle attack. This is the access between the system and the website is intercepted. Common cause of this is unsecured Wi-Fi networks or malwares or applications or user accounts with weak passwords. Just installing a firewall is not enough to safeguard your information. It's like securing the front door of your house and leaving the windows and back doors wide open to be accessed. The other part as well is the Internet of Things, which is commonly known as IoT devices. As IoT devices continue to grow, and also they become vulnerable to cyber attacks. In medical clinics or dental clinics, this includes X-rays, X-ray equipments, automated check-in stations, smart TVs. These are all considered to be IoT devices, which are in most cases connected to the same network at your clinic which also has a server that has the file access. It also has a practice management system installed in it. So essentially, those devices also could be vulnerable to security and could be uploading information without your knowledge. So what happened in 2020? Well, obviously COVID-19. We also started working from home, remoting into our offices and clinics, and accessing patient data. We had to buy new hardware, which may or may not have been compatible with systems. They may or may not have been secured, as the rush to work remotely substantially increased at the beginning of COVID. How many of you know how much it increased the security risk of having your employees working at home? First of all, it was personal computers that were used. Who knows what was on them or what is on them, and who it is used by in your family? Who else may have access to personal and patient information? Whether the firewalls, antivirus, and sharing of home Wi-Fi networks, another security risk that was fairly common or is fairly common. Some online meeting tools were unsecure and were used to communicate without encryption and were used to communicate and share patient data. Employees accessing patient data remotely on their home PCs using remote desktop or TeamViewer or applications similar to that. In 2019, a ransomware attack happened worldwide every 15 seconds. This year, it is going to happen every 11 seconds. It is increasing at an exponential rate. Some of the additional facts are over 70% of Canadian companies are or have been target of cyber attack. Over 90% of cyber compromises are due to email phishing. Over 70% of companies are not able to recover quickly from a cyber attack. Some companies have not recovered at all.
Gina, I'll let you talk about the risk of significant harm.
Thank you. So as Naheed has explained, and there's lots of opportunities for bad things to happen. And when we have attacks of one kind or another, whether there's cyber attacks or other types of risks of privacy or security incidents, there is somebody that gets harmed from it. And in legislation speak, we talk about the risk of significant harm, or ROSH. So a ROSH is an assessment that we do when there is a security incident to determine what are the bad things that could happen. How can this harm an individual? So remember, we talked about having 3 pieces of information can uniquely identify an individual. So it doesn't take much. So when the bad guys or the bad actors have those 3 pieces of information, then other types of things can happen. And we know from experience, what we've read in the news, what we've read in the investigation reports, that all sorts of bad things do happen. So when you're assessing the level of risk that could happen because of the incident in your organization, it is the best practice to assume the worst thing. So if you have a privacy or security incident where 5 patients' information got sent to the wrong clinic, or instead of going to a clinic, showed up in Joe's Bar and Grill, that is a risk to the individual. So think about a common referral letter that you might have for a patient, whether it's for dental or chiro or medical. There are things that we're going to share with that referral partner. It's going to be their name, address, date of birth, their healthcare number, and some medical information, the reason for their appointment, the reason for the referral. It might include names of other family members. It can be very, very identifying. So if that information showed up in Joe's Bar and Grill, then all sorts of bad things could happen. So they could be at risk of having people talking about them. So there could be water cooler gossip. There could be malicious. It could be somebody stalking them. There may be somebody who's leveraging that information to blackmail them for something else. the point is, when you're doing a risk assessment, when you're managing a privacy breach, is that you need to assume that if there is identifying information that's included in the breach, that bad things are going to happen. So it could be the risk of identity theft. It could be medical identity theft. It could be information that their information is compromised, and they may lose their identity. So there are a lot of bad things that could happen. When you have a privacy breach, you need to assess the type of information that's included in that breach and then determine if there is a risk of harm. Now, I'm going to give you the easy button on this one. If it includes identifying information, it has at least 3 pieces of information, you're going to assume every bad thing is going to happen. So you don't have to hem and haw and say, well, kind of maybe if they did that, then they could. If they've got 3 pieces of information, you go straight to the point where it says there's a risk of harm, and then you're going to start your notification process. So let's take a look about what could happen if there is a privacy breach and you need to notify your regulators about that breach. So this process is common across Canada and across the world. So when you have identified that there is a privacy breach or a security incident, you need to start keeping records. You need to get copies and screenshots to be able to document what questions you asked and what information that you gathered about that breach. You're going to make a determination about whether or not there is a risk of significant harm. And I've already told you that can be really easy. If it's got at least 3 pieces of identifying information, assume that there's a risk of harm, go to the next step. The next step is to be able to report that breach. Now, you need to report it to the custodians, the physicians, the trustees, the healthcare providers who authorize the collection of the health information. Regardless of what terminology from which provincial legislation you use, you must notify those people to let them know that their patient's information has been compromised. Now, in most provinces in Canada, there is a requirement of mandatory notification to the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner. Most provinces have that name that might be called an ombudsman. It changes a little bit, but there is a notification requirement to the regulators. Now, each province does have some specific requirements about how you notify, but just for the moment, assume that you will notify the regulators. You also need to consider who else do you need to notify. You need to notify the patients, the individuals, and the healthcare providers whose information is also included in that breach. We often miss that part. Now, in Alberta, we also need to report to the Minister of Health. Other provinces don't have this requirement. It's again unique to Alberta. So you need to notify to your commissioner's offices and patients. And there are some rules that you need to follow. Each province is different, but they are very particular about the steps that you do this. So if you have a privacy breach, I'm sorry. If this is the first privacy breach that you're dealing with, call a friend and make sure that you get some expert guidance to manage that privacy breach. One of the people that you want to contact is your lawyer. They don't have to do a lot of things necessarily, but you do want to contact them to make sure that you're meeting your legal obligation. And I always suggest that you contact the lawyer that's associated with your professional association. So if you're a member of, the CMPA or a medical association or the dental association, they're going to understand your questions and your concerns a little better than the guy on the corner that also, manages traffic accidents. So let's take a look about what can happen if you have a malicious breach that you need to notify. Now, this step does change between provinces, but generally speaking, this is the direction that you're going to see most provinces move to. The regulator is going to do an internal investigation, and they're going to decide whether or not the information that you provided is something that they are going to proceed as an offense under that privacy legislation. Then in Alberta, they share their investigation results with the Justice Department or the Crown's office, and they're the ones that lay charges under the Health Information Act. In some provinces, the commissioners can actually lay charges. So that does change from province to province. But what we are definitely seeing is that people are going to court So if they get caught snooping, they're looking at other people's records, they're looking at their own records when they shouldn't be, when they are maliciously getting the information. So we see people that are siphoning their patient lists in their current clinic because they know they're going to move to another clinic in a couple of months and they want to bring their patient list with them, or they've got the independent contractors who are siphoning off the patient list. That's a malicious use of information. It's not authorized, and that is an offense under the privacy legislation. So we're seeing people going to court. Now, in court, people are getting fined. They're getting probationary sentences. So if they break the conditions of their probation, they're looking at going to jail. And what we're seeing in Alberta is that a prohibition to work in your field. So you're no longer allowed to work in healthcare or have access to health information for up to a year. So we've got seeing some very significant sanctions that are court ordered that is a big impact to privacy breaches. Now, if you are a member of a designated health profession, you may also see a discipline from your professional regulation, which may include having fines. It may include remediation, a prohibition from working, losing your license and not being able to work in the field ever again. So managing a privacy breach is a big deal. And what I want to share with you tonight is to make sure that you know what the steps are for you to manage that privacy breach. So it's part of the privacy impact assessment process to be able to demonstrate that you know what those steps are, that you have a program in place that you can take off the shelf and implement right away so that you can best mitigate the risk and the risk of harm about that privacy breach to those individuals, to your healthcare providers, and to your business, and to the healthcare system generally. So if you've got additional questions that you'd like to ask me later about privacy breach management, I'm happy to do that. But let's hear some more from Naheed.
Thank you, Jean. Data stolen from businesses ends up on dark web where criminals buy and sell to commit fraud, get identity documents, or fund their criminal organizations. Information for sale on the dark web is up to 20% more likely to come from a breach that wasn't in the media, or which usually was for a small business or for a small organization. It is important to implement email encryption in your practice for patient data correspondence, updating critical systems timely with security patches and updates, and I emphasize timely. Vulnerabilities are released every day, if not every hour. You also have to ask yourself, is the practice management and file server backed up? Are backups continuously tested to ensure data is recoverable? How quickly can data get recovered in the event of a ransomware, malware, or even a server failure, or disasters such as fire, flood, etc.? Can your clinic operate without the practice management system for a day or even hours, depending on the size of the clinic, depending on the critical nature of the operations? Also, the physical and remote access to your servers and remote systems. So what are the cyber criminals looking for? We're mostly login and password information. So they can monitor and watch your emails. They pretend to be you and send emails on to as you to multiple email addresses in your organization and in your contact list. They set up dummy emails. They log into the network as you to see whether you have access to what systems and when. They try logging in to multiple sites that you access. 80% of people use the same email and or password for most, if not all websites. So what can we do about this? Require complicated passwords on your network. The longer, the better. Be careful when you click on links. Do not open attachments unless you know what it is and you from what you are expecting. Do not respond to emails asking you to confirm or change your email or passwords. Companies like Microsoft, Google will never ask you for this information. Use multi-factor authentication on your logins. This is one of the safest things you can do. Require it in all logins and applications that supports this feature. Require voice authentication on critical systems, especially when you are responsible for wire transfers or any online fund transfer authentications. Require remote users to use work computers only, which are managed with necessary software, including security software and VPNs to dial into and connect to the practice management systems remotely. Check the email address of any emails you respond to. It's not an easy thing to do on a cell phone, but something that to keep an eye on. Check if any of your clinic information is for sale on the dark web. This is the service to subscribe to for continuous monitoring on a monthly basis. Your IT provider should be able to assist if they specialize in data management and or data security. A couple of questions that we have asked organizations, especially for small to medium-sized healthcare businesses, of what is the recommended percentage of IT expenditure? Usually it's about 5 to 10% of annual revenue to keep your system safeguarded, just as a benchmark to measure things up on IT side of things. The other question that we've asked is cybersecurity insurance, which is a new risk mitigation tool that many businesses have been using in the last 5 to 10 years. What trends are we seeing in cybersecurity insurance as it relates to privacy, compliance, and IT infrastructure planning? Well, cyber insurance has to be looked at as one of the tools in the box for a robust cybersecurity program that has multiple elements that help it to work most effectively. Strong IT infrastructure, regular check updates, patches, employee training and awareness, IT personnel, third-party partnerships are the changes of monitoring and staying connected to the most relevant and trending exposures of the cyber insurance policy. Most cyber policies come with a number of proactive risk management tools, such as employee cybersecurity training programs, which help reduce successful phishing attacks and dark web monitoring, which scans the dark web for signs that data related to your businesses have been compromised. Most importantly, when it comes to responding to a cyber event, a good policy will give you access to IT experts, forensic specialists, PR firms, lawyers, and more, and often with no deductible. When an experienced cyber insurance reviews an applicant for insurance, they will do an extensive underwriting process and will help identify potential gaps in the IT infrastructure or the policies and procedures. An insurer won't provide coverage to a company or a clinic that isn't already aware or proactively managing its cyber awareness infrastructure policies. They will provide feedback on why they won't provide coverage. And again, if the insurer is experiencing specifics that needs to improve before coverage is offered. However, if a customer qualifies for a cyber insurance, then the above mentioned resources and tools will be at full disposal to further enhance the level of cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thanks, Naheed. That was very informative, especially that insurance piece. And thank you so much, Jean, as well. So we're just about to wrap things up here. And I wanted to let you all know that you will be receiving a 10 steps to prepare your PIA amendment from Jean. And then from Naheed, you're going to be receiving a cybersecurity checklist. So that way, with both of those components, you will be setting up your practice for success. And so now we can just open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions for either Jean or Naheed, feel free to comment. I guess in the meantime, while people are kind of thinking about questions, we can just have our final little wrap up there, Jean and Naheed. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
The privacy impact assessment process, it takes time, and it's really a big ask to ask somebody to do a PIA the first time, but after you've done a couple hundred of them, they get easier. So don't be afraid to help. That's going to give you a guided hand to help you complete your privacy impact assessment. And your privacy impact assessment is a way to do some good documentation for your business that you can repurpose for other things. So I love the discussion, Naheed, about cybersecurity insurance. And like all types of insurance, you need to be able to demonstrate that you've taken reasonable safeguards to prevent those bad things from happening. And cybersecurity insurance is also one of those things. So they may ask you when you apply for cybersecurity insurance about what are your policies and procedures, about managing your risks, about managing access. So all those policies and procedures that you did for your PIA, it's going to help you with your cybersecurity insurance application too.
Yeah, absolutely. Naheed, is there anything else you wanted to add on about that?
Well, from a cybersecurity and managed services perspective, it's important for all businesses to do an audit at least once a year for all their systems, including who has access to what, as well as continuous audits of making sure that the accounts are disabled, passwords are changed often enough, as well as the cybersecurity testing, including any phishing testing, any network penetration testings are done periodically to ensure that the network is secure, the data is secure, and most importantly, to train your employees to ensure that they're able to manage those risks and be able to respond to these kinds of phishing attacks, as well as be able to be more vigilant about these kind of things.
Naheed, you just mentioned passwords, and I had a quick question.
Yes.
For those, those password management software programs like Dashlane, are those secure enough for like the workplace?
I would say to an extent, any software that is online, that is connected to the internet, has some kind of a vulnerability in it. So, we've seen most recently in a system that Microsoft has, Microsoft Exchange, for example, that a fairly high vulnerability was discovered. So no different where online password managers or any other tools that are connected to the internet can be secure, but it has to be managed well, including with other tools such as multi-factor authentication, so that we have the extra safeguards into place to access our password information.
Okay, that makes sense. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jean and Naheed. That was very informative. I feel like there's a lot of information there, so I'm sure people will have questions, following up. But I think right now we are good to go. So thank you everybody so much for joining us. We will be in touch, like I said, with those follow-up materials for more information, so you can go ahead and get that PIA completed and have your cybersecurity measures in place so you're set up for success.